Hello, everyone. My name is Taliesin.
And I'm Evitel.
And welcome to the Directing at Blizzard panel with our panel of directors from Blizzard.
Our esteemed guests. Should we do introductions very quickly and go around and say hello?
Yes, please. I was incredibly excited when we got asked to host this, because in my head, I imagine hosting it in our house, at our table, serving your drinks. But instead, we're kind of in your houses, which is almost as good. Can we start with Marc, maybe?
Sure. Hi, I'm Marc, Messenger, and one of the cinematic directors. Mostly work on the pre-rendered movies for WoW.
And Doug?
Hey, I'm Doug Gregory. I actually directed the pre-render for the Diablo 4 announcement, and also several of the WoW shorts for like Jaina Warbringers and things of that nature.
And Jason?
Hi, Jason Hill. I am currently director for the in-game cinematics for Overwatch 2. Also directed pieces like the McCree Ash announcement piece and some of the Heroes of the Storm pieces.
Ben?
Hi, I'm Benjamin Dye. I'm currently directing Overwatch shorts. I've been doing that for the last couple of years. Prior to that, I did some StarCraft cinematic in-game and pre-render.
And Brian?
Hi, I'm Brian Horn. I'm the cinematics director's supervisor, and I've been I recently directed the Shadowlands announcement piece and a few the Maldraxxus 2.5D piece and several other things for Hearthstone. And I've been an editor on a lot of our cinematics for several years. So
I think that's about it. No, and Terran.
Hi, I'm Terran. I'm an in-game cinematic director, working mostly on World of Warcraft throughout the years, although I have dabbled occasionally in Overwatch, Heroes of the Storm, and Diablo. So.
Awesome. And just from a complete outside perspective, if no one knew who you were, or as Blizzard was set up, we can see straight away that we have a huge breadth and range of people working on a whole different bunch of projects and games. How does that work within sort of the structure of Blizzard, you working on so many different teams and things, as opposed to how it might work in a different studio?
Sure. Yeah. So we have a team set up. We work under the umbrella of story and franchise development. That's sort of our department within Blizzard. And we have different departments within it, but our cinematics team services all of our game teams. So they all come to us, whereas other studios, you're working on one single game. And so you'll wind up with, all of those directors who are working on a cinematic focused on that game, whereas we're kind of a central service.
When we're at the office, which we're not this year, but we're in kind of a big bullpen of the directors and writers, and there's a lot of collaboration. But it's a very busy place with a big slate of projects, and so you get people taking turns on different IPs. Sometimes. I mean, I've mostly done World of Warcraft, but I also did a sojourn on Diablo Reaper of Souls, and some stuff on Heroes of the Storm. And that's true, I think, for every director that we have. It just kind of depends on the schedule and what people are excited about. Are they looking for a new challenge? But generally speaking, I think we all develop specific relationships with a game team. And we work hard to build those relationships. And so they can be, it can be fun just to stick with an IP as well, as you just sort of grow together as a team.
So you've never had any instances where there's been a certain project that you've all wanted to work on? You've had to have some kind of duel or face-off as to who got it?
There's a giant fight ring. Yeah, we have a giant fight ring in the back.
Right.
We duke it out.
We did that short at Blizzcon a couple of years ago.
Yeah, Terran and I took it to the parking lot that one time.
The parking lot.
Literally the Marc Gora, I guess.
Typically, there's enough to go around, I would say. So, like, if you do want to work on something, our IPs are around long enough that those windows get to open at some point.
Yeah. So with kind of that huge variety of things you can explore, how do you guys actually decide what you want to make and kind of how you tell a story?
I guess that's almost different for every project, isn't it? I mean, I think depending on whether it's a pre-rendered piece that is for announcing a game or for marketing a game or an in-game cinematic that needs to tie to the actual game story and game content. Once we get into the production process, it's very much the same, working with writers, working with the storyboard team, stuff like that, working with the game teams. But it all starts from like, what is the need? What is the goal here? Why are we even making this thing to begin with so often?
Yeah. To dig into the specificity of that, you almost have to go project by project as they all, come of their own volition and needs and what needs to be serviced in the creation or support of the game or marketing, advertising, or what it is. And it's different per game, right? Blizzard is a large umbrella with lots of dev teams working on lots of products, ones that are well known and anticipating right now, and ones that have been around for a long time, like World of Warcraft. And each one of those teams has their own creative spirit and expectations. And our institution, Story and Franchise Development, has to be pretty agile as far as being able to adapt and service and work with those game teams in whatever way they need our support and ways we can help them.
Yeah, is it a strictly reactive process, as in something needs to exist here, and so you kind of fill those gaps and think of something to fill it, or is there something that maybe nothing's been suggested, but you just come across a moment or a story beat where you think you could really add something to it by creating?
And I'm sure you have things in the works now that are for things coming way down the line, so please feel free to talk about all of those in detail.
Spoilers
have a list
everywhere.
Okay,
No, it's very good, very good. No, it's a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B, right? As we do each update, going all the way back to the first in-game cinematics that were implemented in Wrath of the Lich King. It was a bit more, the creative director and narrative designer on the team was coming, hey, we have a really, really, really big moment and we would like you guys to help, spike this to make it really cool. And we're like, okay, this is gonna be really challenging. And then over the years, it started to become more collaborative in the effort of assessing, okay, now that we can do more than one of these, like we did during 3.0 for the Wrath of the Lich King, well, if we're gonna do 6, what should they be? And it was usually a open discussion of, let's take a look at the high cloud view outline of the game and kind of identify what lines up to the greatest equity as a Warcraft player or a connoisseur of this content. Like, because a lot of moments might be extremely important, but are those the ones that should be presented in a cinematic fashion? Well, the ones that should be presented in a cinematic fashion are typically the ones that will resonate throughout the years, that will actually probably outlive even the content update that it's included in, right? It will forever be a legacy of the story moving forward. And I think that causes the water to just rise on its own as far as you start to see the 5, 6, whatever number moments float to the top. And then once we know what they are, then it's a long process of iteration and creative collaboration between narrative design and SFD writers and the directors, as far as like twisting and mutating that into something that will ultimately become a really cool film. So.
Yeah.
And I'd add to that, actually, I'd just add to that a film like Old Soldier was kind of an outlier, because that was a situation where the game team was just interested in just doing another film. And they came to us and said, you guys want to think about something else, so that was just like, a gift from heaven for me. I was so excited just to be able to pitch something new. And so out of the excitement from that and the success of that was really born the whole arc of those Sarfang films. So definitely there are times when we go, we absolutely need this to be an announcement trailer. And sometimes it's like, yeah, this is clearly intro. Sometimes it's hard to decide. And Terran and I will talk together and talk with the game team and our team about, well, should this be, explained in the intro, or is this something that's better for the announcement?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of ways that we go about it.
All the way back to Goblin and Worgen, right? Like there was his first piece was Goblin Worgen, and the Cataclysm intro, and it included in its early storyboards a bit about Goblin and Worgen, but it ended up being cut out of that piece and was focused on Deathwing, while the in-game cinematic team picked up the intro for the Goblin and Worgen in that bit. So.
I had to wait till Gen to do my Worgen. I so wanted to do my Worgen, and I didn't get to until Battle for Azeroth. So.
The way you describe it there sounds like, you know, you've got a lot of freedom. For those who maybe aren't aware, the Sourfang cinematics are, you know, high resolution CGI trailer quality sort of films, and there's 3, 4 of them. Was there never a point when you were kind of pitching this when someone turned around and went, Marc, this is gonna be incredibly expensive. Are you sure it's really necessary?
Well, we kind of worked in advance of that. I mean, we really, when we decided to do another film, you know, we were thinking about what do we already have? What could we work with? You know, and it was really that I was looking at Battle for Azeroth intro coming together and seeing how cool Saurfang was. And I started thinking about maybe we could do something else with him, you know, so the wall is the wall from the Battle for Azeroth trailer. You know, we had to create Zakan, basically. That was our new asset. And so we kind of hit a cadence where every one of those films, we get to use some of the things that we'd already built, and we'd hopefully build just one new thing. And of course, by reckoning, we had to build the whole wall of Orgrimmar, you know, and the honor guard, and you know, a couple other things. But yeah, it was actually pretty well planned out in terms of just the, you know, the economics essentially of, you know, managing our resources.
Lots of moving pieces coming together to kind of allow sort of creation there. I think those cinematics are a really good example of how Blizzard cinematics in general can kind of almost transcend their role and actually influence the direction of the game and the narrative that they're sort of being made for. And I think we see that quite a lot in Overwatch kind of cinematics as well, where so much of the sort of world building and character building sort of relies on those, because the game isn't really built for that so much. I know, Jason, you work a lot on the Overwatch stuff. Is that something that you found, that you are kind of, the things that you come up with in the cinematics are sort of influencing the game in that way?
Yeah, I think in some cases, and Ben can definitely talk to this too. I mean, there's stuff that we've done in cinematics where they're like, "This is really cool. Like, this should be an element in the game too." And that happens for both for in-game and pre-rendered. Where the in-game, we're just having an idea when we're kind of building the cinematic and throwing out ideas for like what the intro cinematic could be, and they're like, "Oh, that's really awesome. Maybe we can incorporate that into the gameplay too as an element." So it is definitely a collaborative process. There is definitely stuff that comes out of our cinematics that the game teams get excited about, like as during development. And I think so often we have to be working far enough ahead of time to actually, you know, release when the game is ready, that they have time to kind of pivot and go, "That's cool, that's cool, that's cool," and then absorb that kind of stuff whenever possible. And it just makes for a better product too, just because then it all feels connected in a much better way, where it's like, "Oh, that was from the cinematic," or that was, you know, vice versa, and stuff like that. So I think absolutely, I think we feed into each other. Because we also look at stuff they did in the game. It's like, you know, that combo that everybody loves to do. What if we did that combo like in a cinematic? Like it goes both ways, I think. So, but yeah, absolutely. Ben,
I might be wrong, but I get the feeling Ash is quite an example of that, sort of a character that was sort of developed in a cinematic and then kind of found its way into the game a bit more.
Ash is funny, because that was she wasn't ever meant to be in the game. Like, that was never her intent. That was us in Story and Franchise, like, okay, we need a good foil for McCree. We need a good bad guy that can stand toe to toe with McCree in a piece that you believe it, and also have this moment. Because in the McCree piece, we actually had set out for that one to be much more of a character piece, much more like, if you look at it, the action of that piece is very short. It's more two characters talking for a while. So we wanted to make sure we had somebody who could stand up to him. And so we you know, I worked with our team to craft this character, and it was really pretty early in production that it was Jeff Kaplan who looked at some early storyboards and was like, "Wow, she could actually be a hero in Overwatch." And like in the back of our minds, we're like, "Yeah, that would be cool." Yeah, but you know, never really thinking that would really happen. And then about halfway through, like, yeah, I started hearing the whispers in the halls and stuff. And it's like their design team was super excited, and they were starting to build. They had 2 designers run off in separate directions, not even talking to each other, to build kits for her and trying to figure out her. So they have plenty. They always have ideas for their next heroes. They have multiple heroes that are always being worked on. But this was one I was like, this would just be like, yeah, if we can make a hero out of this character and launch her with the cinematic, you know, at BlizzCon, that would be fantastic. And it worked out. So then it became a lot of back and forth with the game team of like designs, what we could do with her, what we couldn't do with her, what would translate to gameplay, what wouldn't work so well with gameplay, or, you know, even the game design. It's like, no, please don't do long flowing hair on the design for Ashe. It was like, that'll kill us. And I was like, okay, we get that. So there's all these things that you kind of start to take into account once that becomes a reality. But initially, yeah, Ashe, she was not meant to be a game character, but I think we were all thrilled when it became like real that she was going to be one. So I think, but that was a great example of the cinematic helping to feed into the gameplay to help build a character that then we can continue to explore the lore of that character also. Good opportunity.
Yeah, that's amazing. Little stories like that. I mean, I feel like we can't talk about cinematics influencing the game without mentioning Zakan and World of Warcraft.
Yeah, I don't want to get too caught on the World of Warcraft
No,
stuff, but
no,
I
no,
mean,
no, but
like,
you know,
that's a great example.
It's all right.
It does kind of feed in. It does kind of feed into the next thing I want to bring up as well, which is BlizzCon and the kind of the way that, as you just kind of hinted there, your work quite often finds its premiere, unusually perhaps for kind of game studio cinematics and films, in front of a live audience, as opposed to getting its debut online.
A very large live audience, yeah.
Very large.
Yeah, I've seen it. It's intimidating. And having that kind of instant feedback and reaction. And I'll always remember our first BlizzCon when we saw the BFA cinematic trailer, and, you know, people were on their feet cheering when, you know, Sylvanas does her Banshee wail and things like that. But then very soon after that, you have sort of the community reaction and memes and the way that even without prompting, the kind of the model and the character that then became Zakan in the Saurfang cinematics was already being kind of built up by the community and talked about and memed upon. And was that a happy accident that you also included him in that cinematic, or was that a kind of response to community reaction?
Marc totally planned all of that.
I bet.
I am omniscient. No, we were so excited because we were just moving forward with our project, and we had identified Saurfang and he needed a partner. And I was looking through the movie that we were making, and I was like, this guy, for some reason, we gave him a moment. We just wanted a little moment where he reacted to Saurfang's rally. And I was like, well, you know, let's take the mask off and see what he's like underneath. So we were already into that when the whole Zappy Boy thing got going. So, you know, we were all like huddled around the computers looking, you know, and going, are you seeing it? This is that. You know, it was wonderful. It was wonderful.
Has a fandom before we even did it. Awesome.
Yeah,
Just embraced it.
easy game. And what's that like as a creator to have your kind of film shown in front of a live audience like that? Because that must be very unusual for, again, like, you know, game studio sort of cinematics. What's the feeling like just before a premiere in that sense?
I mean,
Who wants to take that one?
Doug, you premiered Diablo just this last one, right?
Yeah.
Did yeah, it was pretty incredible. I mean, there's really nothing like an audience to let you know how well you're doing your job, in all honesty. And that's a pretty rare thing, I think, for anybody to have the opportunity to see or feel. And I mean, as a matter of fact, that's how I became familiar with both of you guys, is after doing some of the World of Warcraft shorts, you know, for the 2.5D things, and being introduced to the idea of people watching things and reacting to them and recording it in general. So then taking that whole experience that I had learned on World of Warcraft and taking that into the Diablo thing, where you're actually trying to perform kind of a horror movie and getting to see if those jump scares work, or just any of that sort of working in general, especially since it had been so many years since Diablo had seen literally the light of day. Was super exciting. No, it was amazing. And even more amazing, the composer of the music in that short, which was phenomenal. He knew nothing of video games before we pretty much brought him out to BlizzCon to experience that. And I think his mind was readily blown to get to kind of see everything that's built up around this and get to see it for the very first time at BlizzCon with all the bells and whistles on it, including his music. I imagine that was pretty special for him as well.
And just the number of people, you know, I mean, a filmmaker can go see his film with an audience in a great big movie theater, and you maybe, you know, can cram like 400 people into that theater. But we're talking about 30,000 people, right? That all watch your movie at the same time, and a lot of them are in the same room. I mean, that definitely has a unique effect.
Yeah, and I think there's an element too where everyone's following along, right? Like our audience is kind of they're predisposed to kind of be along for the ride, right? So they're always a good crowd. So that, and they're always looking for the little things. So that's also something I think that we experience is like every little thing matters tremendously to everyone who watch, to a lot of people who watch it. Yeah, so it just gets like combed over so many times, you know, freeze framed and all that stuff. So
to that
we kind of have to be on our A game.
Yeah, to add to your point, Brian, whenever we launched the Sombra piece at BlizzCon, we actually did that whole faux beginning, like where we were going to play like this. Here's a video of some great moments from Overwatch this past year, and it had Kaplan in the video and everything else, and then it started to glitch, and I was sitting out in the audience, and as soon as the video started to glitch and playback, everybody was like, "Oh, it's Sombra! We know they're going to announce Sombra."
It's a historical moment for us. We're waiting for
But that's how tied in the community really is. I mean, we tried to throw a ruse at them and they just saw right through it, but we were stoked for it.
Yeah, my mind is taken back to one of my favorite memories, which happens to be Diablo 3 and not World of Warcraft for this memory. In 2010, when we premiered the Demon Hunter class, did the intro cinematic for that one. And I think, you know, these things get to be a fun song and dance between the creators at Blizzard and the community, right? The community's expectations, what they're expecting coming to BlizzCon, what they're expecting to be announced. And this year, they're of course expecting another, you know, Diablo hero. And knowing that the moment that we showed exactly how they fight is basically the reveal of the class, we then endeavored with a knowing nod to be like, we're going to postpone the moment where you know how she fights as long as possible. And so while she stepped into the frame, okay, she's got an armored boot. Is it a paladin? Is it a warrior? Don't know. She's inspecting something. Oh, is she a rogue? Is she a stealth? You know, and then later she's carving something. She's like, what is going on there? And the moment where she pulled out the crossbows and unlocked them, like literally that's a mechanical cool thing, but the whole thing was under the guise of withhold the information until the maximum moment. And then boom, when the crossbows went out, the entire crowd at BlizzCon erupted and like, ah, I'm like, yeah, that's a dance that you get to play with a community that's so plugged in, and then being able to double back on, well, how do we play with being so plugged in, right? So it's a wild journey.
It doesn't always go the way we want though. Like
I was going to ask.
So what happened on the Shadowlands piece that came out this last year? We, you know, we represented Bolvar Dragon, who's, you know, taken on the mantle of the Lich King in the interim since we've lost Arthas, and we haven't really seen him this way. So we were really excited to kind of represent him. And what ended up happening is that I think that the community got a hold of an image of him prior to our cinematic, and there was a lot of speculation about sort of our design and what was happening in the particular frame that we chose for this thing that got out there. So a lot of speculation around it. But what ended up happening, which was great, is the moment in the film, which wasn't really designed to be a cheer moment necessarily, became totally that. Like everyone was like, yes, this is the moment that we've all been hyping up on our own. So it was.
Hey, I recognize that. Yeah.
It's amazing. You have these yeah, many opportunities, but also challenges. I think working so closely with some very, what's the word, passionate communities. So yeah, it's such a unique, I think, element of kind of what you do. But I think probably your backgrounds kind of as directors is also quite unique, or kind of what you've done before.
I think we've heard already like so many different directions that you approach these things from. I think that speaks to a kind of a range of different sort of backgrounds and ways that you sort of arrived where you are right now. Would you say that's kind of typical of a team like yours, or is it sort of more diverse, unusually so?
In all honesty, I haven't heard of any other company kind of working this way. I think we all actually come from very different walks of life. I came from a background of doing trading cards for Magic the Gathering and comics for DC Comics and things of that nature. So I kind of come from comics and 2D language in general. But I know that Jason worked in lighting and Marc was at storyboards. I'll let the others speak for themselves, but I think it's fairly unique to Blizzard.
Me and Marc's probably the most traditional sort of career path, going from storyboard to directing. Prior to storyboard, I was an animator. So it's all kind of all over the place. Brian, you used to be the editor.
Do you find that like that has helped you guys kind of shape the sort of the team and the way you approach the sort of cinematics in your own image a bit more?
Yeah, I mean, everybody has their own sort of approach. I think traditionally, board artists will approach it in certain ways, but I feel like everybody has their own unique sort of way to tell a story. You can't really say that. I look at a piece that Marc did, I'll be like, oh, that's very Marc. Like I can tell Marc in every single character that they worked on. Star fans, probably Marc. I can see him in
because I act a lot.
He does a lot of reference.
I literally.
So you can tell that thing.
But I think it's still the passion for the storytelling and also understanding what directing is. Directing isn't just necessarily saying, this is what I want, this is my vision, go do it. It's working with a team, growing a team, helping a team, being able to communicate with the team, and just helping everybody move along. Directing a show sometimes is more like just helping to direct the process and not saying, do this, this, or this. We have so many talented people at Blizzard. They bring so many good ideas, even outside of just the story process. But I think us being very passionate in the story process is what keeps us in it, keeps us going. I mean, I think we've even had people who've gone in for temporary directing assignments who are like, you know what? I realize I don't like directing. Like once you actually kind of get into it, you realize that isn't something that I want to do. I actually enjoyed what I was doing. But it's great that Blizzard gives that opportunity and has given that opportunity to let people try out stuff and see, like, is this something you want to kind of pursue? Because it does take a certain passion, a certain love, and a certain amount of commitment to be able to focus so much of your time and energy on these pieces and so many moving parts that are just even outside just artistic, just everything that's involved.
It's kind of like it's a practice to have a really thick skin, around you. We put our soul and everything into a piece, and then you show it to the game team and our executive and up here, and they'll just rip it apart for good reason, because you're so close to something, and you become sort of tunnel vision, and everybody sort of piled in and gave you good feedback, and then you just have to adjust and sort of looking at this piece in someone else's shoes, that really can help you sort of broaden your point of view and then try to make a better piece. And a lot of time as a director, I learned that sometimes it's better just to get out of the way. Like Jason said, like there's animators, lighters, who does something for their livelihood, and they're so good at it. Sometimes you just need to point them at the right direction and let them go. And a lot of times that's like the most rewarding part of the job, is seeing your vision and then someone else plus on top of it and made it 10 times, 20 times better. So yeah, I think we all have stories of something like that happen in our career.
Well, I was going to ask, like, do you have an example of something that maybe you just felt incredibly invested in, and like it really was your vision that you then appreciated you had to let go and sort of leave out for the greater good of a work? Or
well, that's like every day kind of. I just got out of a story meeting for the current project. Yeah, there's something that I really want to sort of showcase, and then show it to the game team. They're like, well, that's nice, but that's not what this character is about, or that's too much. You lean too hard into this one aspect of the character that we all love, but that's not what he or she is all about, So you gotta take a step back, go, okay, it's the holistic view rather than just being like, I need to have this really cool moment where she or he does one thing. So yeah, it's a give and take, as much as I love directing, that these aspect is something that a lot of us has to get used to. It's your baby, but you have to be able to kill your baby, sort of.
Yeah, the joke I would make with Jeff back in the day was, our VP of cinematics, is that you're paying me just as much to let go of ideas as you are of me having ideas, because that's really the job. It's like you're really super precious about something. I'm going to chase this thing, and it's going to happen. It's going to be amazing, and then somebody's going to shoot it down, and you have to be willing to let that die, and then find the energy for the next thing. I mean,
yeah,
so that was readily available for me. Marc was working on something, and we wound up showing it to a team at some point, and man, they just kind of came in and nuked it, not because they didn't like it, it just wasn't the direction they wanted to go. And I think we kind of both walked out of that meeting just a little hangdog, just a little like, man, what are we going to do? 15 minutes later, we were sitting in the office and we're spitballing ideas, and we were back up and running, and you're just like, all right, now we got this other thing, and I'm going. So,
it is that pivot. It is that recovery and the pivot and coming up with another new idea really fast, or because production's not going to stop or even wants to slow down for you. I mean, it's people are waiting on especially us to make decisions and to help. And so that exactly what Doug's talking about. It's just, we have to, if an idea isn't working, we have to quickly problem solve, come up with a solution, and present and represent it as quickly as possible, and hopefully as polished as possible. And
kind of like a boxing match, right? You get knocked down and you have to get up right away before the count goes to 10. If you don't, I mean, you have to. There's no you don't get up. You just have to bounce back. We have like an incredible team of like writers and storyboard artists and pretty much anyone. You can go to anyone, in the animation, Blizzard animation, and go, you know what, I have a problem. Can you guys help me solve it? And then I'll get tons of email, just people walking up to me, or just we have this group of directors, and sometimes I just send out stuff out, and then go, hey guys, I've been working on this. I feel pretty good about it, and then they'll give me 20 notes that I just did not ever think I would think of, but they see it in a very fresh perspective, and that's how we able to. I think, at least for me, that's how I was able to like bounce back from the hard knockdowns, right? Because you're like, I invested so much time, hours and hours of boarding and reboarding, editing to show the game team, and they don't like it, and they're they have the rights to not like it. So
what's unique about Blizzard, and I think working in games in general, is that you kind of have that double, because on a show, on like a TV show or a movie or something, you're gonna get that same sense of like, I've got this idea, but it just doesn't work within the context of what we're trying to do as a whole. But with game development, because it's running at a different kind of cycle than what we do in animation, a lot of times you wind up with these moments where you're like, here's this thing, you guys loved it last time, we're showing you now what we've done, and the game team can sometimes be like, yeah, that's not the game anymore, and you kind of have to just throw it away because it doesn't line up.
That's a regular, I don't say a regular occurrence, but yeah, it's something that we live in a world, to Brian's point, where with TV or a feature film, you have your script and your animatic and your storyboard, and that process is a very linear process that moves forward. And with game design, it's a very iterative process. What is fun? We're trying to create fun, and so we think this is going to be fun. We go down that route, and we go, it's not as fun. But if we backed up and went this way, all of a sudden it is fun. But that affects what the cinematics team is doing. So then we still have to be able to pivot within making a cinematic to go, okay, that character isn't available to us anymore, or now they want to add a new character, or this environment has to change. And how do you incorporate that into the narrative that you've already, the train that's already on the tracks? You're either adding cars or removing cars almost in real time to your production. So it's an additional challenge, which is, again, something that I think all of us here, like, kind of, really kind of enjoy the challenge of like, okay, that's, every once in a while you're like, ooh, that one hurts. But then you're like, okay, we gotta,
yeah, because it's so hard, the win is so sweet.
I feel like all of you now have alluded to the importance of kind of the to and fro and the sort of the personal kind of interaction with each other. That obviously begs the elephant in the room question of, obviously you're not all in office together at the moment. And how has that had a negative impact on that way of working, or is that just another thing that you've been able to adapt to? And
I miss the shooting the live reference on video with all the other people that are involved in that process.
100%. That's the big
able to do that.
Yeah, that's definitely something we wanted to ask you about, actually, in regards to the Southfang cinematics. And like, famously, we've had insights into the process of making those before, and how it's quite common in planning any of your cinematics, but particularly those ones of using sort of live action as a reference. And how is it sort of collaborating with artists and making that happen? Does it affect how sort of the entire thing sort of takes shape?
Yeah, it makes it better, because we can explore, we can iterate really quickly in the room, and we make sure that when we shoot these sessions, before we were all stuck in a room like this one, but when we would get together, it would be, we'd bring in animators who were going to be involved. We'd bring in the writer of the piece. The editor was very welcome to join. Our previs person would be there and would be looking at it from a camera point of view and actually shooting the cameras most of the time. And everybody had a voice, and it was just like, okay, what did you guys think of that take? And somebody would say, I wonder if we should try if he comes in slower, and we'd go, okay, let's try that. And so you can really, really quickly try a lot of things. And it can look very silly, but you can get over that and realize that I think we're actually to the point now where we don't get self-conscious about seeing ourselves on video just wearing street clothes and looking like dumb people, I mean, it's just like we're now just committed to performance, and actually trying to do a good job and trying to tell a story. We're actually not encumbered by costumes or lighting. All we're trying to get across is camera and performance and editing, making a movie. It's really movie making in its purest form in some ways. And that gives us a wonderful blueprint, not just to get approval from the game team, because it's great for them to see the subtleties of performance, especially in some of those Sarfang films, which tend to be very based on subtleties. And then it's a wonderful blueprint for the animators to just, go for it. When you're showing something in a storyboard form, it's a completely different experience from when you're seeing it done in previs or done in live action. Things that seem really like, we will deliberately, when we're doing storyboard animatic, sometimes cut things faster than we know that they will be, because they're playing too slow, and it's not invigorating people in that form. And then we always say, well, it's going to get longer, because it always gets longer, because we always sort of underbid how quickly we can get through these shots. And then when you add in performance, you find all those subtleties require a little more time. So we just try to keep that in mind and be flexible.
Absolutely.
Somewhere a producer just, their ears started ringing.
Yes.
All that.
You've been tricking us all this time. Well, I think that's really interesting, because something I always think about any of the franchises that you guys work on is the different balancing acts that you have to do in terms of what kind of makes a cinematic. We talked already about the kind of very sympathetic, almost like rabid reaction that you'll get from BlizzCon, people who are, you know, very wanting to be engaged with it. And you know that, you know, some idiot nerds, don't know who, would go through and rake through every single moment of everything you've created. And you know that they're going to appreciate those moments. But of course, the cinematics also have a different function. They have to appeal to people who maybe aren't so familiar with the franchises and work as advertising and things like that. So how do you find that balance in the storytelling between those who you know are like incredibly intimate with the story and the franchise and those that are less so? Overwatch is probably quite a good example of that recently, because with 0 Hour and sort of launching into Overwatch 2, you've got very strong characters, but you're also like selling a new idea and game.
It kind of gives me nightmare thinking about 0 Hour, the story. When we set out to make 0 Hour, there's a long list of what it needs to be. It needs to set up, you know, Overwatch 2. That's because it's the announcement. We need to figure out how long has it been since, you know, Overwatch 1, you know, or when Winston sent out the first message took place, and then sort of make sense of all the shorts that we have done in the past. It's just a laundry list of things that we need to do. We need to, I found myself and the writers drowning in the narrative of what needs to go into that piece. We spent a lot of time trying to figure out all of that narrative, and then, you know, and still have a cool action sequence where you see the heroes do their thing. So for the longest time, we have like this ginormous sequence in the airplane where Winston and Maid and Tracer basically tell us what has happened so far, you know, like, oh, this is, you know, you send out this message, nobody answered. What about, where's Genji? Where's Soldier 76? Where, you know, like, how do we tie in Diva or all these other characters back into this piece? And at the end of the day, we had to take sort of a step back and look at what what we try to achieve and what we want the audience to do in particularly in that BlizzCon, and try to refocus. Like, we should just pretty much go back to the core, to what Winston wanted. He's still the main character. He's the one that kind of started the whole recall engagement to kind of call everybody back, and then we kind of went back to him, and that sort of refocused us, and basically we cut out all the backstory, which freed us up to be, you know, a little bit more character driven, less plotty, and just have a good time. So hope.
Yeah, Overwatch is such an interesting example because, you know, I haven't really played that much of it, to be honest, probably because I'm terrible at it. But like, I will watch anything, like consume any media, buy anything with Diva in it. Like, I'm completely sold. But it's just one of these kind of examples of kind of creating characters, putting them out in the world, and kind of bringing people in who, yeah, might not be super familiar with the game or the story behind it.
Whereas obviously I'm amazing at the game,
well, yeah,
and I am equally as engaged. So it just shows that you're succeeding on all those levels.
Well, a lot of time, what I do is I ask myself, if my mom watched these, would she understand it? And then
that's a common thing. I think a lot of us do.
Yeah, or my dad. You know, like when I remember when I showed Dragons to my dad, he kind of go, not bad. And I'm like, I think I did it right, you know. But yeah, most of the other stuff, it goes over his head still. So I kind of give up on my dad.
I think people look at it like a movie. A movie is a full 3-act structure with rise and fall and all that, whereas a cinematic is one moment, right? Like 1 to 10 minutes usually, even with our short films, it's 1 to 10 minutes. And we can classify these usually along the lines of intro, finale, interstitial, trailer, short film, you know, promotional. And each one of those, if it's identified which one of these it is, it will define the type of content that it creates, right? An intro is meant to peel back, you know, the curtain on the world. The interstitial is, hey, remember this story? We're pushing it forward. Finale is putting a sword through a planet, or whatever that ends up being for the storyline that we're working on. But that does draw a little bit more of a crystalline, like, okay, there is some parameter on the type of story we need to tell here, right? And his Ben's story was like pulling back the curtain on, hey, you're about to embark on a whole wild new journey. Everything informs around that structure, and it can be challenging because that's a parameter that you're then locked into. But that's why we work for a game company and not just doing whatever.
In many ways, the Diablo 4 cinematic by Three They Come actually is free from a lot of those kind of problems that you've been talking about and describing in sort of other cinematics, and that it is almost a clean slate. You know, it's this completely new game and something that people are very excited about, and you're able to kind of set the scene for that. And I think as a result, it definitely comes through in that particular cinematic, the focus on atmosphere, really, and you're just creating what this game is going to feel like as much as telling any story, which I think is done incredibly sort of effectively. What were your sort of influences with the atmospheric feel, and what were you trying to achieve overall with that cinematic?
When the game team came to us, I think the big kind of byline that we had heard running around, you know, campus was that they wanted to really return to the darkness that was Diablo 1 and 2. You know, kind of get back down into the mud and the muck with everybody on Sanctuary, and maybe tell stories that felt very human, you know, less about angels and demons and being kind of at that God plane the whole time. So what can we do to kind of bring it literally back down to Sanctuary from their POV? But we also had the task of bringing God back, essentially, you know, Lilith. So we had to find a way to marry both of those ideas together, because we knew she was going to be our big bad. We wanted to give her a hell of an introduction, something that would stick with folks. But we also wanted to acknowledge this idea of the struggle that you as a player might be able to at least feel along with the characters in the piece. So that was really exciting. As far as just the look and the feel of it goes, I think a lot of my aesthetic, you know, was informed for that piece from the 2D and kind of comic background that I have in terms of paintings and things of that nature. So when it comes to something like Lilith and her introduction, for me, that came from like the Venus de Milo, like the Botticelli painting of the woman in the clamshell that people know. I was like, okay, I want a moment that's going to resonate like that. So I drew a Post-it note, you know, to show my art director and stuff like that. I was like, this is a painting I know. This is an image that I think will stick with people and become a desktop. And then you start, you know, backtracking from there. Like, how do we arrive at that image? What justifies that image? And then we knew we were going to have like a sacrifice and opening this kind of portal to the abyss, you know. So what does that mean? Well, it means we'll probably, instead of just it being a gate that somebody walks through, you're actually going to probably make that gate out of the, well, let's just make it out of the people we brought into the room. Let's not waste any ingredients and make it. We'll actually just strap them to some pillars and just stretch them all out. And then she can actually just come through them, because that'll be the kind of prestige. The fun thing will be, it's just a flat sheet of blood and guts, you know, that she's going to kind of morph out of, be born through. So that's kind of how we started working backwards. And then, well, they're not just going to open up and be gross. We don't want that, because if it's too gross, you won't want to look at it. So we need something that's terrible but beautiful. So why don't we make their guts start looking like a flower when they open up, you know? And that'll also justify the blood petals at the end. So this is a queen's coronation. So you just start building on images on top of images. That's the fun thing for me, at least, when it comes to that side of things.
It's interesting that you bring up the idea of like Renaissance paintings and things like that, because I think that sort of grandiose sort of majesty really sort of comes through in that. You're the art critic, not me.
I studied art history, so this is all like very, very exciting for me to hear. But yeah, I love the idea of, you know, in some cases you start with the image and you say, this is what I want to begin with, and then build the story from there.
And the art director on the game, John Mueller, on Diablo 4, he was always referring to Rembrandt and of course Caravaggio in terms of what they wanted to do with kind of the look of the lighting in the game and things of that nature in general. So I think he and I very much speak that same language in terms of what we're referencing in general. So that just makes that sort of click that much quicker. So at the very beginning of the cinematic, we're kind of in that Caravaggio, very low light. You know, you can't quite see where the edge of the bridge is. We could fall off at any second until you get into that room, and then it becomes kind of a cool light setup. And then normally cool light means you're safe. It's a nice swimming pool. It's a cool ethereal place. But in this particular cinematic, we went from cool light to kind of that, the red lights that you got at the end that were very much like Italian horror films, you know, like the Suspiria sort of crazy, epic, operatic color scheme.
But I love the idea of that you had that image, kind of tentpole image almost, as it were, of the appearance of Lilith as like what you kind of worked from on that. And I think that's another thing we see in the Shadowlands cinematic trailer as well, is you could say that that is kind of based around this grand image of like the sky shattering and exploding, and it's become kind of like the key image of the expansion in a way. Brian, you were involved in creating that. What was your kind of vision for that?
Right. So I think similar to Doug, like we, in ours, we also had a portal that we have to show, right? A gate to a new world. And I think especially with WoW, like we've done a lot of portals. We've done a lot of, translocation type of things.
Ripping open the sky, ripping open this, ripping open
right,
that.
ripping open the world itself even, right? And so like, how do you, like, where do you go from there? I think in this sense, we were not just, sort of not just interdimensional, it's also like a plane of existence entirely, right? So it kind of had to be something different than we've ever done before. Our effects team, I kind of really enjoy the effects exploration that we get to do. So that was something with that effect, where we just piled layer on layer on layer of things until it finally started to feel like something that we hadn't really seen before,
Yep.
So that's.
And I think to an earlier subject point, reciprocally, when everyone thought that's the most amazing image I've ever seen, I think internally the game team was like, oh man, we have to make that work above Icecrown.
It's like, yeah, good luck putting that in the game. And we all had a laugh and then a big sigh after that.
Yeah. but they figured it out, but I am told it was not straightforward.
I feel like that happens a lot. I feel like the Diablo team for Diablo 4 must have just been going, thanks, we've got to make a game that's like this now, right? And likewise, I feel like with Overwatch, that the cinematics have kind of, we was talking about how they inform the game, but I feel like Overwatch was maybe conceived to kind of work alongside its cinematics more so than other Blizzard properties. Would that be fair to say?
Diablo, even StarCraft and WoW have the ability to tell lore easier in game. There are slower moments in those games when you're going to a quest giver or transitioning. Overwatch, from the minute like that game starts, you're running and shooting. It is a fast-paced 4-player, 4-on-4, whatever. You don't have a lot of time to tell a story or lore in the actual gameplay itself. And so I think it was realized very early that we needed another way to get the audience familiar with the characters, understand the world, understand what everything was about. This is the tone. And that's kind of where some of the original cinematics even started and came from and were birthed from, was this like, let's help people understand what this game is, what this world that they're playing in is. And so, and that's continued with all the other shorts. And now that we started it with the Retribution piece and the Uprising, and Terran actually did the Junkertown. Junkertown! Yeah, exactly. We are working, especially with Overwatch 2, using cinematics to advance the lore, to tell the story with the gameplay. So it's finally kind of coming full circle. Like it's the cinematics helped kick off the world, the gameplay, everybody fell in love with, like, this is awesome, this is so much fun. Then we kept hearing, we just want more lore to go with our gameplay. It's like, okay, so now we're coming back around the bend, and that's coming.
Trying to figure out the right way to touch on this, but before Overwatch was announced, like, Blizzard hadn't had a new property in 12 years. StarCraft was the last one. And I think we were looking at the realities of, like, hey, to build a new Blizzard property is really challenging because the other ones have gotten so big. The other ones have gotten so huge and so expansive and so immersive and so well fleshed out and so well understood by our communities. And I think that kind of created a paralysis for a while, where they're like, we need to throw and eventually they got out of that mode and they were like, we just need to start with an idea. Right, like just a very, very simple, clear concept. And the story I heard from Kaplan was, it was just the lineup of the heroes, right? The original concept artist of the original 20 heroes, and that was the idea. We can figure out the rest, as it develops. Just as back in the day, Warcraft, it was little tiny dudes wailing on each other. We didn't know anything about the world or the lineage or the night elves. No, it started as an idea, and then it flourished and grew. And I think Overwatch definitely just wanted to get out there. Hey, here's our world, here's our heroes. And then in partnership between SFD and Cinematic Initiative in the game and the community who loves it and the cinema and the comics that get developed, it's just continually expanding the notion of what this world is, up to and forward to Overwatch 2.
Yeah, I love that idea of, again, just this image of these heroes and this lineup kind of creating the whole story. And then on the other hand, you've got Terran. You've got quite an interesting story and history working with World of Warcraft, which is kind of the opposite, which is it's old. I mean, in the best way. It's been around for
being old is cool. Okay.
Yeah. Like a fine wine, but I'm sure
you're not going to find anyone here that disagrees with that. That's cool.
I'm sure that's kind of come with its own like growth and development and changes over the past years. Can you talk a little bit about that?
No, absolutely. Any game that has been running as long as WoW has, which there are very few, right? I mean, there's games that refresh themselves, like they'll release the 7th sequel and then this 8th sequel, but it's not the same code base being updated end over end, right? Nor is it the same world that never hits a narrative reset, right? There's never been a Marvel Cinematic Universe reboot on Warcraft. The game series is linear from 1994 to today. And for World of Warcraft specifically, I often make the joke that since we're updating not only expansions, which we release, but also every update, every patch throughout the year, multiple times a year, I say that because it's 16 years of World of Warcraft, we're on season 16 of World of Warcraft. And I think it brings with it all the challenges of if you were joining a television show that had been running for 16 years. And what does that mean? Well, it means you better understand the legacy context, the fan base that has been there since the beginning, the people that are only watching because they tuned in recently because their friend got them into it, and starting to create that alchemy between servicing, the legacy echoes of the flavor of the game that people fell in love with, maybe in the Warcraft 3 era or the Burning Crusade era, all the way up till today, while at the same time not allowing it to stagnate, not allowing it to relitigate the same storylines of season 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which become more and more challenging when you get up into season 16, 17, right? And so luckily our pipelines, I think, give us the benefit of being able to lean in harder in different avenues, right? Like I work in in-game cinematics and they play in the game's experience as a completely seamless. They're playing 1 second and it goes in and it's not playing and you're back in the game the next. And so its goals are, hey, you're already here, you're bought in, you're invested, you're playing the game. We're going to make this really, as we often say, insider baseball, right? Like we're going to acknowledge that there's a lot to know and reward you for knowing it, right? Because it always feels good. Hey, I never remember that guy. Hey, I remember when that was relevant. And so there's a lot of endorphin hits there. But that has to be a cognizant decision. Like in-game cinematics function well that way. The moment we get one step larger, I think, like the 2.5D work that Doug and Marc and I did the Bastion one recently, that starts to spread the divide as far as like, okay, yeah, these are a little bit more lore heavy. We're going to tell more lore intensive tales with them perhaps, but it's got to be a more agnostic audience. It's got to reach a broader demographic. It's got to make more hearts sing, without context. And then above that, we have the pre-renders that Marc works on, where it's just like, hey man, you really should, tip of the rocket, we call it, right? This should be able to touch anyone, anywhere, and get them totally jazzed on World of Warcraft. So
it's interesting because we're kind of facing something similar. Like you said, you had 16 seasons. We're on season 2 with Overwatch 2. But one thing I can say is that we want it to be accessible to both the current player base for sure, but also new players. And so how do you expand and tell the story and grow the story without having to tell a bunch of backstory and stuff like that people already know? You don't want to retread that ground. And you don't want to also tell new players, oh, go watch all those cinematics over the past couple of years. It'll get you all up to speed. And we want you to be able to come into the game fresh and be able to just get in, play, and enjoy yourself. So I think we are also kind of having to be super smart about how we're doing it and tell a good story. And you know, I think there's assumptions that people make about Overwatch's lore that they'll learn stuff in Overwatch 2 that is different than what they're like, oh, I didn't. An example I can't talk about because it happened at Blizzcon is the mission that people played was Rio. And in the beginning of Rio, Overwatch encounters Lucio for the first time. Even internally within Blizzard, people are so used to these characters being played at the same time that they just accept, oh yeah, Lucio knows, I'm just throwing out anyway, Sombra or whatever, but that's not necessarily, the gameplay is separate from the lore. And so having these moments like in the Rio mission and at BlizzCon where it's like, oh, we're actually getting to see how this character meets this team for this first time. So both players who know and love Overwatch are learning something about their characters, but also new people who are coming into it can roll right into it also. So there's definitely a balancing act that has to happen there.
Some production-minded things we've succeeded in over the years have been like, we can use that to our advantage on pre-visualization. Instead of using storyboards, maybe we can use the game. Maybe we can actually, like little toys, move this character over here, move this character over here, snapshot, 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 cut that together as an animatic. And we've gotten entire films approved that way. 5.4 Terran Zoo versus Garrosh. I pitched the entire story of that to Chris Metzen at his desk by flipping through screenshots. And they just random, you know, orcs or chains flying through the air. I'm like, was that cool? They're like, yeah, it's cool. I'm like, and that just skipped over a whole legacy project. Of course, we have the benefit. I have to say, the reason why that works for us is because the environment was built, the characters were built, the animations were available. That does not service all needs. But when you find yourself in World of Warcraft, a tale that's being told, we're obviously going to revisit things. It ends up in this space of like, oh man, we have an advantage here to be able to lean in on Arthas, lean in on Nazgrim, lean in on Jaina, lean in on all of these established characters. And it just kind of crystallizes. And then we always want to outdo ourselves. So we find new ways to express that, right?
In terms of the stories you tell and the characters you present, I guess WoW has another unique problem in that, do you ever feel weighed down or limited by the legacy of the characters that you're working with? Is there a sense that maybe you're kind of stepping on eggshells a little bit and there's things that you can't do?
Could I take that one?
Yes, please. I was about, me personally, no, I thrive in that chaos, but I will yield the microphone.
Warbringer Sylvanas was really hard to come up with a story because literally, and you know, we have the wonderful benefit of having our own lore department, our own historians who will help us find our way as we craft our stories. So Warbringer Sylvanas, that just took so long because we kept trying things and we would be told, yeah, we sort of already said that she can't do that, or yeah, we established that she felt a different way, or yeah, you know, her lore was so vast and defined already that when we got to trying to tell a story about, you know, this moment of her at Teldrassil, it was just really, really hard to you know, find that story. Actually, you know, it's funny, Doug was also involved in breaking of that, because I remember we'd worked for many, many months actually on a version of it that was more like a fairy tale version of her backstory, you know, more of a storybook kind of thing. We thought that would be beautiful and lyrical and maybe economical, because the 2.5D movies are very hard to do because it's all paintings. So we went quite a ways down the road, and many, many different dead ends that we had to turn and come back from. Finally got something where the game team was pretty happy with the story of it, but we all kind of looked at each other and went, it's actually kind of boring, isn't it? And we had to admit, I had to admit, yeah, it was just kind of laying there like a dead fish. So fortunately, Doug had done a movie with a dead fish, Azara, And so we got in a room, and he and I actually blocked out a new version of it in a day, basically. So it really becomes, sometimes necessity is the mother of invention. Sometimes the pressure is on and you just have to figure it out. And in that case, we really just, I think what we realized was we were trying to tell too much of the breadth of Sylvanas's backstory. And when we realized, let's just make it Sylvanas's very, very, very bad day. The day when everything went wrong. And once we focused, then we found the story. So.
Yeah,
and how that turned into the Night Elves' very bad day. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, when you talk about how to keep an IP fresh after so many years, to me that's the key. You have somebody like Terran who holds the knowledge of it all, really, which is amazing, and he's going to bring that to the table. And then you bring in somebody like myself, who kind of is in between, or I guess on the other side, because Marc would probably be a little bit more in between. But I'm the person that actually knows very little. I'm the person that's picking up, in season 16, and I'm just starting to watch. So when you come to me with Jaina, and you tell me, oh, we have this character, and I know who she is, but I don't know all the backstory. And then when I hear all the backstory that you want to cram into the episode, I just react to it like, I don't care about all that. I want to know her emotional state and her emotional reaction to that. So that's where I start attacking it. And I just go, what if it's a dirge? What if it's a song? And then Terran would add a thing on top of that. And then it quickly kind of builds from there. But then Terran's able to take what Jaina was for me, kind of skipping the rock across the pond. And he's basically able to deep dive into the lake with everything they did with all the, the IGC work. So I think that's, to me, that's the great thing. I actually kind of like to keep myself a little more agnostic on the outside of the games to some degree, because I always want to kind of be in that state of like, what am I learning? Am I learning at the same time that kind of the viewer is learning to some degree? But I think you need it all.
I have to say that this has been really inspiring, and I've loved hearing all of these insights and opinions and ideas. And I don't know, Talie, I'm considering a bit of a change. So could you guys say very briefly, what does it take to be a director at Blizzard?
Oh, wow.
Should someone want to be a director at Blizzard?
I'm going to try, while they answer that, I'm going to try and think of an even more impossible question to answer than that.
Or what would you say to someone, coming out of school who wants to get into, making cinematics for a game, for Blizzard games, for example?
Well, what I will say is, like, none of us came into the job as directors. But I think all of us came to Blizzard with it in our heads that we wanted to tell stories, and we wanted to, we aspired to be directors. And we kept after it, and we kept, in some cases, whenever your annual review came up, like, what career goals, what do you want to do? I just want to direct. And so for a lot of us, like, when the opportunity presents itself, no matter how small it is, jump on it. Just jump on it. If you're that hungry for it, jump on it, do it, show them what you got, show them that, that you're passionate about it, and run with it. And that's kind of even what happened to me. It's like, I was in another position, which I loved doing, and it was a lot of fun, but ultimately I feel like I'm a storyteller. And so that's what I kept going to management with. And, eventually an opportunity presented itself. They're like, okay, show us what you got. And then never looked back. I never went back to my old position. It continued on. So.
Yeah. And I would say, like, you don't need us to, like, if you really love directing and really love making things and seeing a vision come to life, you don't need us for that. Like, and I think each one of us came from a place where we had our jobs, we loved our jobs, we were specialists at whatever we did, but we also did this other thing. And so that other thing became our main thing after a while. And so, like, whether, like, I made short films on the outside. Marc has done that too, like writing scripts and stuff. And, and some of us, like the way Doug or even Terran developed their own pipeline that we now do, like they did that before they were directors, like Terran was doing machinima before this, and Doug was art directing. That's how Xiaohao came about. And then that just became the thing they did. So that's how I would approach it. It's just like, don't let anyone stop you.
Yeah, don't let anybody tell you it's time to start directing now. We have given you that opportunity. You pretty much want to just be doing it, and rolling into it, right? We all had those different jobs, as Jason and Brian mentioned, but we were all doing something. And it was all from that angle of, we need to tell a story. How do we get that story across? Well, for me, it was drawing two-dimensional images on Post-it notes, or, you know, working with the comics team when I was art directing, or I was always just trying to tell stories. And eventually, you know, when Shao was an opportunity that came along, and I told Chris Metzen, I think we should animate it. He was like, well, what can you do for $1,000? And I was like, I don't know. I'll go find out. And we did enough of something to get it going. But that's what it was. It was $1,000 that I was allowed to spend on something. And so when that opportunity is there, you just run with it, and just run as far as you can with it. But yeah, I wouldn't wait for anybody to give you permission.
I think that, Doug, what you said is so right on. It's like, if you've got a story in your head, get it out, write it down, draw it, photograph it, put it into a role-playing game, whatever it is, get it out.
Yeah, humans love stories in their DNA, but storytelling is a practiced art form. It's a muscle, and you need to find ways to do that. Like, make stories, even if they're not good, finish them, make another one, tell your friends, pitch it to your friends, all of that stuff. And there are disciplines that are more close to mentors of story, right? Like, animators are going to be closer to the directors or the animation director. The storyboard artists are going to work with the directors and art directors all day. You know, these disciplines do have more of a gravity on a mentorship to be able to glean watching the practiced art form in process. And the more you can watch the practiced art form in process, the more you can observe and learn that, wow, this is a muscle that develops. And usually it's the people that have developed the muscle, whether here or elsewhere with your own projects. It's evident. It's evident when you see someone with strong story muscles. You're like, hey, you want to try doing this? You know, but you just got to work that out and get to the point where when the opportunity does come, you can leap at it.
And be excited to fail. Because you're going to want to do it a lot and as quick as possible, and then get back up and iterate on that idea. And then if you can, surround yourself with curious people. In all honesty, you can bring so much to the table, but it'll never make up for having other people that you can kind of lean on that share a curiosity for something. You know, if it hadn't been for Laurel Austin, the artist on Shao, I wouldn't have gotten that made. She had to be somebody who painted, but also was curious as like, what does animation mean for her as an illustrator? That shared that bond for years. But it's the same thing I found with my editors that I've worked with, or the animators. It's they're all excited by something, and they're excited by the thing that they don't know, and they want to pursue that as well. So try as much as you can to surround yourself with people that are curious like you are, and stay curious yourself.
No, I was just going to say, I became a storyboard artist deliberately to be closer to the filmmaking process. You know, that was my way in, you know, with the intent that, yes, I did want to be a filmmaker someday. And I was fortunate enough that Blizzard, you know, gave me that opportunity. I think the common denominator for all of us is that we are all really, really passionate and very committed to storytelling. And I think it really is story, because we have such a great team of artists that are all very disciplined in their own disciplines, and they can make pretty pictures. But it falls on us, along with the writers and the game team, to be the guardians of story and to not settle, you know, to keep pushing. I don't know that story is, you know, in a lot of film schools, I think there's a lot of focus on the technical disciplines and on how exciting it is just to get a film made. But you know, I think it's really, really important to just focus on how do you tell a good story. You know, I think that's the hardest nut to crack.
Me and Marc will probably the more a traditional sort of way to get to directing, which is through storyboarding. I remember I was one of the only storyboard artists for this group for a long time before we were able to hire Marc. So I was the one person that kind of stayed late with the directors and sort of drawing their vision onto paper, and then the next day they take my drawing, my edit. I was able, back then we don't even have Brian to edit, so I was editing my own boards, putting sound effects, and then the next morning he will take it to the you know, the game team review, and then he'll come back in that afternoon going, yeah, we need to start over. What are you doing tonight? You know, and then we just kind of build this thing over and over. I think a lot of it is, to sum it up, it's one, you have to want it enough, because I wanted to do that. That's what I wanted to do. So I don't care what I have to do to get to that position. I just did it. Two is, you do have to have that sort of intuition of what is interesting and how can you tell the story of a banana, it's like make something mundane interesting. Then you have that ability to direct, make something out of nothing almost. And for me, it's listening to people, it's never I realize being director isn't about like, oh, this is my vision, this is everything is mine. It's eventually it's a combination of everyone who got involved in this project, from the game team to the artists, to the cleanup artist, to the last person who touches our animatic, the mixer, the color correct person. Everybody had a voice in this piece, and everyone left a little bit of a mark on there on it. And we were just lucky enough to be able to call this, be able to be the director of this one project or whatnot. But yeah, it's everyone's passion, sweat, tear, and blood.
Yeah, and just one last thing to top that off is Ben made me remember is that it's not our jobs to have all the best ideas. It's our job to recognize the best ideas and use them. And so I think a lot of people get confused about that sometimes.
Tend to the garden of your talent. Yeah.
Yeah, and also have the courage, almost kind of the courage to kind of die on certain hills, right? Like I always tell myself, every project I have, I tell myself I give myself 1 or 2 hills I'm gonna die on, and those are my tempo. If you don't, I know I can't win every single battle, but I know I'm gonna win those 2 battles.
I bet you we would all agree on that. Like you picked one thing, like, this is the heart of my piece, and this is
the gold seal. You hold on the gold seal until you spend it. Yeah.
And yeah, that usually once I spent that, I'll be like, I'm done. Everything else, I can't ask you guys to do more because I
got everything I want.
Yeah.
The one thing I wanted. Yeah.
Amazing.
Oh,
well, guys,
thank you.
yeah, what a privilege to be able to talk to you all about this today. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your insight and your just vast experience and being so candid about everything. I'm sure we are not the only ones that it's meant a lot to. So thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We love what you do. Thank you so much.
Always.